Good evening. I'm Kathy Bieberstein. On behalf of the founders and the board of directors of Freeport Speech, I'd like to welcome you all here this evening to this highly anticipated conversation with Martin Fletcher. For those of you who are new to Freeport Speech, we work to bring provocative and inspirational speakers to our audiences in the hope that through conversations at the local level, we can build a better understanding of important topics. As you arrived this evening, you were welcomed by photos in the lobby from Martin's book. These were recently featured at Christie's in New York City and have been kindly loaned to us by NBC News. The other artwork in the lobby is by Martin Fletcher's wife, Israeli artist Hagar Shur Fletcher. After tonight, you can see her works for the next few weeks at the Color Collection Gallery and the Seidel House Gallery, details of which are in your program. The NBC photographs will be on display at Color Collection as well. Martin Fletcher has covered world events as a foreign correspondent, reporting for war zones for 40 years, including time as an NBC correspondent and bureau chief in Israel. During Martin's career, he has won almost every award in TV journalism, including 5 Overseas Press Club Awards, several Edward R. Murrow Awards, 5 Emmy Awards, and many others. Tonight, Martin will lead us through the journey chronicled in his most recent book, Teachers, The Ones I Can't Forget, which you received this evening. In the foreword to Martin's book, Tom Brokaw painted a picture of what he clearly views as Martin's gift to us all. He said, "In these pages, you'll see again and again the journalism of a truth teller in desperate circumstances, telling the revealing, intimate stories that would go unnoticed without the heart and soul of this great journalist who has a calling." Please join me in welcoming Martin to our stage to share his tales of people who carried on no matter the circumstances.
Thank you very much. I'm so excited to be in Maine. We arrived here last night, staying with Tom and Rita Saliba, amazing home. This morning I went to a real estate agent looking for a house to buy overlooking the bluff, but I don't think so. I don't think so. Also, I want to welcome Seeds of Peace. Thank you so much for coming. You've reduced the average age of the audience by quite a lot. So yeah, so resilience, the journey through life and the world, I guess. I mean, that's what I did. I always wanted to write a book about what I'd learned in my travels, and I thought that it would have to be, if it was, the lessons I learned, it's going to have to be a very thin book. And in fact, it is a thinner book than usual, and there's a reason for that, which I'll get to. My job took me to the most insane places, to the worst places at the worst of times, meeting people on the worst days of their life. That's the phrase that I always use. And there's no rule book for the places I went to and the situations I got myself into. Most news organizations have a book that tells you how to behave in certain situations, the legalities of situations. Everything I did, I had to make it up as I went along, pretty much. Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran. In Afghanistan, I walked with the Mujahideen from Pakistan across the Hindu Kush Mountains for 3 weeks from Pakistan into Afghanistan. Iraq, Iran, I was there when I was the only person to get inside the embassy when the American hostages were kept there for 444 days. I didn't want to go inside, by the way. The students grabbed me by the neck and took me inside. I was able to get out after a day. Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Ethiopia, Somalia, Rwanda. I mean, all the worst places at the worst times. And what I wanted to, the point that I only understood a couple of days ago when I was thinking about what I was going to be saying here this evening was that the common thread of the places I went to and the people I met pretty much could be summed up by saying that all the leaders in most of those places wanted was money and power. And in most of those places, all the people wanted was peace and quiet. That was a simple lesson. I think, you know, we want to educate our kids, we want to put food on the table, and it's so hard in so many places. And that's what I discovered in my work. But I didn't discover that until very recently, and I worked at such a crazy, frenetic pace, covering the world's troubled places, and wars, and revolutions, and famines, and tsunamis, and all kinds of hurricanes. I didn't have time to think about a thing. I didn't reflect in the slightest. It was only when I began to write books that when I left NBC, that I began to rethink about what I'd been doing, or what it meant, and the import of it. Some of it was important, I guess, and some of it wasn't. And I wanted to write fiction. And the reason I left NBC News, there were a couple of reasons. One of them was I didn't want to get shot at anymore. I thought I was kind of at the age of 62. I think I've been there, done that. But what I wanted to do was to write fiction. And at one point, I was writing about a character in my first novel called Otto. And I was just introducing Otto on the page when I got a call from NBC saying, Afghanistan, 3 weeks. I had to go to Afghanistan for 3 weeks. When I came back and sat at the computer again, I opened it, I thought, who the hell is Otto? Why did I introduce this guy? And I should have kept notes, and I didn't know what he'd do. That's when I realized, you know, I got to leave NBC if I'm actually going to write fictions. But believe me, what a mistake that was financially. Oh my God! You know, as a freelance writer, it is really hard, which I didn't really realize. I thought with my reputation, no problem. Oh my God! So I was able to get an agent. Didn't hear anything, you know, for months and months and months. And one day, my wife called me. Hagar, in the audience, right there. Hagar, thank you for staying with me all this time. Hagar never ever said to me, "Don't go somewhere." Only once, actually, but it's amazing. So, anyway, she called me. She was crying on the telephone. I said, "Oh my God, Hagar, what happened?" She said, "Oh, you won't believe what happened. I was cooking in the kitchen, and your agent called, and I forgot about the food, and there's a fire in the kitchen, and the house burned down, and our poor dog." I said, "Wait a minute, back up. The agent called?" That's where you get to when you're trying to sell a fucking book. So, in the end, though, I did sell quite a lot. I sold my house. I sold my car. To keep this thing going. And then, when I finally did get a book published by Macmillan, I was very lucky to get a good publisher. There was at a time when there was a lot of trouble in London, about probably 7 or 8 years ago. There were demonstrations, and I actually forget what it was all about. But I went to one residential complex, shopping complex, and every shop had been looted. Everything was stolen from every shop except one shop that was untouched. The bookshop. That's when I realized this is going to be a tough sell, you know. So thanks, by the way, for coming tonight and getting the book. I really appreciate it. The books that I wrote, mostly, even the novels, drew on my experiences. And that's why I mentioned earlier about all these places I've been, and you know, not showing off. It's just that I had so many experiences, and I met so many people in so many extraordinary circumstances that I was able to draw upon those experiences for my book. And the lessons I learned, which I will enumerate a little bit as the evening goes by, really helped me tremendously in writing characters, understanding what they could possibly want. The Seeds of Peace, I just want to mention briefly. When I heard you guys were coming, I thought, wait a minute, I did a story on Seeds of Peace once. When was that? And I was able to find it. So I did a story on Seeds of Peace 20 years ago. So in a moment, Sean, I'd like you to run it. Just 1 minute. It's A. The issue of Seeds of Peace, well, basically what they are, stop me if I get this wrong, is an organization encouraging young people to look at different, coming from conflict areas, and learning to deal with each other and understand each other and find common ways to talk to each other, hopefully making peace, sowing the seeds of peace. Yeah, is that right? Something like that? Pretty much. So I did the story on Seeds of Peace, and it was a very tragic story, as most of the stories that I do are, or rather have been. It was a tragic story, but I want you to listen very closely to the final words of this story. I don't normally show this story, but I'm just showing it because you guys are here. But it's a really interesting story in the sense that it encapsulates everything I'm talking about. It really was a tragic moment, and the question is, what do you do next? How do you get on with the rest of your life? That's the issue that has always concerned me as a reporter and as a writer of fiction and non-fiction. How do you get on with the rest of your life? What do you do? How do you pick up the pieces? And the very last words of the mother in this story, pay attention, and I'll repeat them anyway if you miss it. So, Sean, can you run the first one, please?
The violence and the anger sweeping the Middle East are making it ever more difficult for those still trying to sow the seeds of peace between Arabs and Israelis. NBC's Martin Fletcher has case in point.
They learn young in Israel that with the fury and the violence between Jew and Arab comes the pain. And they die young too. Asil Asler, an Arab, was 17 when an Israeli soldier killed him this week. His family stunned.
I feel a big, big hole inside.
His sister Nadine.
I hope he didn't die for nothing.
Asil is mourned by Jews too.
He wasn't my Arab-Israeli friend. He was a friend of mine. You know, the fact that he was Arab was, you know, something that came along with the fact that he had a beard and the fact that he loved music.
The Jew Moran Eisenbaum and the Arab, her friend Asil, were fighters, but not for war, for peace. Members of Seeds for Peace, a US-based group that brings Arabs and Jews together to make friends, to make peace, beginning with the young. What did Seeds of Peace mean to him? Was it just
I tell you, it was everything, not just friends. It was something he always worked for.
peace?
Yes.
Yet as the streets here turned into a war zone this week, Asil apparently was swept along with the Arab rage. Asil wanted peace, but he also wanted full Arab rights in Israel.
This was this first and last demonstration.
His Jewish friend Moran is shocked.
He couldn't harm a fly. Couldn't harm a fly.
And angry with her own army.
Asil, 17-year-old kid, like, what security risk was he to Israel that he had to be shot dead?
His father says Israeli soldiers ran at Asil, beat him, and shot him dead from inches away. This poster in Asil's bedroom by chance says it all. I want to believe. That's what his family says. They want to believe in peace, but it's getting really, really hard. Yet you don't hear hatred in this house. The message his mother tells the village children today is to be like Asil. Be strong and proud Arabs, she says, but seek peace with the Jews. Martin Fletcher, NBC News, Arabic, Israel. So that's a very strong story. Many of the ones I did was. But what struck me about that piece was the words of the mother who just lost her son. And her advice to her Arab friends and family was, those last words, be a strong and proud Arab, she says, but seek peace with the Jews. I think that's an incredible, strong message, and an important message. And that's what I found time and time again around the world, how people respond to tragedy, not all of them, of course, but many, in such a positive way. They've got to carry on with the rest. They've got to carry on. You can't carry on with hatred. You've got to carry on with compromise. And not everyone accepts that message, obviously, at different times. And it's hard to accept that message very quickly afterwards. But that was an Arab mother saying that. I met a Jewish mother whose daughter was blown up by a suicide bomber. His daughter, 14-year-old daughter, Smadar, was killed by a suicide bomber. In fact, a friend of ours, a very close friend of ours, their daughter was there too, but luckily she was unhurt. But 3 children were killed. And the mother's message, when she was receiving condolence calls from Palestinians and Israelis, some Israelis said to her, how can you accept calls from the Arabs? They killed your daughter. They're the enemy. And she said, her response was, they're not my enemy. My enemies are the people who don't want peace. Arabs want peace, Jews want peace. I didn't accept calls from the enemy who are also Jews and Palestinians who want conflict. And by the way, as a matter of interest, it's quite relevant today. One of the calls she got that she refused to accept was from her schoolmate, Benjamin Netanyahu, today's Israel's prime minister. She wouldn't accept his call because she knew where he stood. So it's interesting that an Arab mother and a Jewish mother had the same response, which is, we've got to carry on and we don't have to accept the cliches, the stereotypes. It's a very important lesson that I found. So the book and the lessons I learned. So I called it Teachers, the ones I can't forget. I think that's it. Teachers, the ones I can't forget. Yeah, right. One of the reasons I called it Teachers, I thought it was a brilliant title, because I thought, oh great, all the teachers of America are going to buy this book. They're going to think it's about school teachers. and I got a lot of people buying the book. It's not about that subject at all, but never mind. So anyway, Teachers, the ones I can't forget. The idea came from an idea that I had, which was I didn't want to write another book. I've written 7 books. I'd written 6 books. It's really hard. I wanted to do something different. And I wanted to use the material in the NBC News archives, which I always considered a treasure trove of untapped images, to create something new, a different way of looking at news. And the NBC News president at the time, now Oppenheim, thought that was a great idea. You know, those famous pictures from Vietnam of the naked girl, 12-year-old, hit by napalm, she's running down the road. The still photographer who took that picture got a Pulitzer Prize. It made him famous and made his career. There was another great picture, if you remember that, of a Vietnamese officer shooting a North Vietnamese guy in the head, you know. And that photographer won the Pulitzer Prize and made his career. Good for them. Standing next to them, shoulder to shoulder, was a television cameraman too, who you've never heard of, who got exactly the same pictures from exactly the same angle, and you never heard of him. So I thought, you know, this is really unfair. By the way, I joined NBC News as a cameraman, so I was particularly upset by this. And so I got permission to go through the archives of my own work, or my own stories, and I wanted to find moments, create moments, digitally edit freeze frames from films, take 1/24th of a second, edit different stills frames together to create something different, something new, a different way of looking at news coverage. And it really hasn't been done before. What I wanted to do was create an emotion. I wanted to create moments that you could respond to. You know, in journalism, our job really is to go out and tell you what happened, and in some cases, direct your thinking towards some kind of conclusion. That's journalism. Art does the opposite. Art does not tell you what to think. It presents you with an image, and it's up to you how you respond to it. Edgar Degas, the painter, said, art is not what you see, but what you make others see. That was kind of my guiding light. I don't want to go too much into, oh, this is supposed to be artistic. But it was a different way of looking at our news coverage and using it in a way that had not been done before. So I wanted to create that moment. And look at this still. Can you show the next one, number 1, Wafer, Sean, please? So this is an extraordinary image that has literally never been seen before, apart from here. You've never seen anything like it. In the history of photography, there's no moment like this. This is a Palestinian woman, 20 years old. Her name is Wafer, and she's a suicide bomber. And right now what she's doing is she's pulling here at the detonator cord to blow herself up. But it's not working. So she's pulling and pulling, and she's screaming in frustration and rage at the fact that she's not able to blow herself up and kill lots of Jews. This was taken by an Israeli security camera. The Israeli security had intelligence that a female suicide bomber was on the way, and they stopped her, and it was indeed her. And it's just an incredible moment. That, you know, this is So what we did, we took different stills in order to create a really powerful image and a powerful moment, and hopefully that provokes, for me, and I hope, provokes a powerful emotion in the viewer. So what it is, just as a matter of interest, is this is one still. This is how she came in her black chador, and she's like this, the head down. And then they tell her, get undressed, take your clothes off, because she's got a bomb on her chest. The bomb's under her pants, as a matter of fact. So here she is taking it off, and here's another still photograph, and here she is, this one, and this is a moment later. And it's very powerful. You know, you've got this sort of, her flies undone where she's unbuttoning her trousers, and that plays off the mouth. And you can't probably see it, but actually here, there's somebody else is screaming, and just sort of emphasize that. And up here, we have a quote from Sophocles, 350 BC. What does it say? "We understand your pain. It is catastrophe upon catastrophe." Sophocles, 350 BC. And the word catastrophe is very triggering for the Palestinians, because the Israeli War of Independence in 1948, Israel called it the War of Independence. The Palestinians called it the Nakba, the catastrophe. So that's just quite, we understand your pain. It is catastrophe upon catastrophe. So, it's like, for me, the painting Edward Munch, The Scream. I mean, this is the real thing. It's an incredible moment. So that's what I did. And each chapter in the book begins with one of the 11 images that I created, and I'll mention a couple more in a moment. So I didn't want to write a book. I wanted to do an exhibition of images. And as you mentioned earlier, it was amazing success. Christie's in New York showed the exhibition in their auction house. NBC Rockefeller Center showed it. I mean, it's amazing. It was so unexpected. I thought I'd get some sort of gallery on 128th Street for a weekend in New York, and it ended up on Christie's. Amazing. But I didn't want to explain what it was. I just wanted people to see the image. But then everybody, of course, said, "Well, what is it?" So I wrote a paragraph, and then I just kept writing, because I'm a writer, and so I just kept writing, and I ended up with 11 chapters on 11 images. And the one on her, it's not about her. Basically, that chapter became "Suicide Bombers I Have Known," and I've known a few, and I met the people who sent them, but I'm going to get that in a moment. This issue of the suicide bomber, I became very familiar with it. It became one of my little specialties, suicide bombers. And when I was in Afghanistan at one time, I went to the jail. I got inside the jail in Kabul and met a Taliban, an Afghani suicide bomber. And the reason I mention this is, you've all heard recently in Sweden about how somebody burnt the Quran in front of the mosque in Stockholm. I believe it was in Stockholm. What an insane thing to do. The police gave permission for that to happen because the law of the freedom of expression was the most important law, and they decided it would be okay to burn a Quran. Nothing yet has happened. We all know about Salman Rushdie. But the story that I did in Kabul, some of you may remember this, it was a number of years ago. A young American soldier used the Quran for target practice. He fired 13 bullets into the Quran from 30 yards. He was actually a pretty good shot. So the Quran was pockmarked with bullets. And this became viral, or whatever the equivalent was 15 years ago. And in a madrasa, an Islamic study center in Peshawar, in Pakistan, 8 young Muslims saw this video of the American soldier shooting the Quran, and all 8 decided to become suicide bombers. And one of them that came to Kabul was caught with the bomb. And he told me his story. He told me that this is why I became a suicide bomber, because this dopey American was shooting at the Quran, and I couldn't stand it, and I decided we were going to kill Americans. And all of my little group did. And he was a very strong, powerful young guy in this jail cell that I was in with him. He wasn't apologetic at all. They deserved to die. And then I spoke to a photographer who went with him, and he was actually crying, saying, we didn't kill anybody. Let me go home to my family. But that's this is what happens. The formation of a suicide bomber is not to be sneezed at by any means. And what happened in Sweden, I bet you something bad. There's a bad follow-up to that. Those 11 images are really important to me, and there are a different way of, as I mentioned, a different way of looking at the news and the impact of news coverage. And I wrote the book, and I wanted to make a little movie, a little film. I made a 4-minute film showing what the book is about and what the images are, all 11 images. And it's been set to music by a fantastic British composer, Michael Hoppe, who's a friend of ours in San Miguel de Allende, where I live and where Tom and Rita spend half the year, I believe. So this is, he was a Grammy-nominated British composer, and he wrote the music for this piece about the book. So Sean, can you show it, please, number 2? Thank you. Yeah, so it became a book, and I had never intended it to write a book about it, but it just wrote itself, really. I mean, each chapter just came pouring out, because all things that I've done and experienced. I think one of the worst experiences as a journalist was that suicide bombing campaign. I mentioned that girl, Wafa, the suicide bomber. But she came from Gaza. And by the way, the reason she wanted to be a suicide bomber was that she had suffered a horrific accident in the kitchen and was burnt, had terrible burns, and was sent to Israel. And the Israeli doctors saved her life. But her fiancé left her, and she thought she would never find another man. And she was so miserable, she decided she wanted to die. And what better way to die than to become a martyr and kill Jews? And so she was persuaded to carry a suicide bomb into Israel. And her target was the very hospital where she had been treated so well that her parents had written a letter to the Israeli doctors thanking them for the treatment and saving the life of their daughter. But her target was the doctor who did it, a guy called Dr. Yuval Krieger. She had an appointment with him, and she said later that the idea was to go to the appointment and blow herself up for some reason. I mean, who can explain? But the thing is, so many suicide bombers, the belief is they're doing it for political reasons, and maybe many of them are. But all the ones I met did it because of some personal tragedy, that their solution was not the one that I talked about, which is get on with the rest of your life. Their solution was literally to kill themselves. And in the years mid-90s, about 95, 96, 97, and then again 2000, 2001, 2003, there were Palestinian suicide bombing campaigns against Israel. And that presented to me a very difficult thing to witness all the time. There was about 120, I think there were 120 suicide bombs in a period of about 6 years, 120, sometimes 2 a day. And I was at the scene of probably 100 of them. And there were horrific scenes sometimes. Sometimes we got there very quickly, sometimes we didn't. And those bombing campaigns became very personal to me. And they presented a real personal dilemma as a journalist, because I lived in Israel, my wife is Israeli, my 3 sons were born in Israel, and the suicide bombers were literally looking for us to kill, or people like us to kill. Their main targets were restaurants, school buses, pizza place, discotheques, any place where people gathered. And so I knew that at any point when my kids went to school in the morning, I would always kiss them goodbye in the morning, and I would never say it aloud, but I always said to myself, and I thought to myself, hope you come back in one piece. That's an incredible way to live. I never said it to the children. I didn't want to alarm them. I'm not sure I even said it to you, to be honest. I don't remember. But what was the dilemma as a journalist was that in the morning I'd send my kids off to school and hope they come back in one piece. And then as part of my work, I would then go to the West Bank and get to know these people. And I got to know the suicide bombers of Nablus, of Balata refugee camp in Nablus, which was at that time the focus, the hotbed of the Palestinian Intifada. That was where the toughest groups were, the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades. And I got to know a guy called Ala Sanakre. He was one of the leaders in the Balata refugee camp of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs. And I got to know him very well. I got to know him so well. I visited him when I was filming stories and also when I wasn't filming stories, just to get to know the guy, understand his group of people, because that was my job. I got to know him, I got to know them so well that one day I was having tea with his mother, Alison Akre's mother. I was in the living room with me and my team, having tea with her, when suddenly Alison Akre burst in with his brother Ahmed and other henchmen with their guns. Ahmed had just been shot in the stomach 3 times by the Israelis, and they couldn't go to the hospital because they knew that when they do that, the soldiers will go to the hospital and grab the victim or the wounded person. So they went to the house, and they looked after him. So I mean, I was watching all this going on all around me. That's how well I got to know these people. And Alison Akre's brother Ahmed was the bomb maker. He made the suicide bombs. Alison Akre found the people and sent them to their deaths, often, usually. And so that was very hard for me, because people would say to my Israeli friends would say, how can you do that? How can you go to see these people? And the response is, oh, that's my job, that's what I do. It's a bit inadequate in that circumstance. But it was the accurate answer. I wanted to understand why they were doing what they were doing. That was my job. And it was sometimes hard, and I had the similar experiences in many places. Remember Black Hawk Down? When General Farragut killed 18 American Special Forces soldiers. When they were looking for him after that, he became like the most wanted man on the planet. I was the only person to find him because I had previously stayed with him in his house 4 times. I stayed with him 5 different times when I was reporting in Mogadishu. It was the only way to stay safe in a country with no army, no police, no customs, no immigration, no nothing. It was just all anarchy. The only way to stay safe was to be actually in the lap of the warlord. That was really the only way to do it. And so there were 5 warlords, and he was the biggest, and so he looked after us, and we were able to report from there for a period of time. So that was the work I did. You know, you really had to compromise your ethics. Another, I think I mentioned earlier, there's no rule book for this stuff. You know, I mean, he had an Italian cook who cooked very well, but the food food he was cooking was all stolen from the aid agencies. And we have Bettina. Bettina was the spokesman for the World Food Programme. So that food that you guys were sending to Somalia, the warlords were stealing, and my Italian cook was cooking. He was a good cook too. Sorry about that, but that was the kind of, you know, the ethical dilemmas one faced. But as I say, it was my job to explain why people did what they do, and that's what I always felt was my journalistic ethical imperative, is to be fair to everybody. Why does someone become a suicide bomber? Why does somebody send somebody to be a suicide bomber? Who is that person? That's what I wanted to explain to my audience, and that's what I did, to an extent, I hope. I'm going to show a movie in a moment. It's a story I did on one of those suicide bombers. His name was Mohammed, and he was sent by Alison Acker's guys. They never admitted it, but I know they did it. Sean, can you show the story? Story 3, please.
Mohammed, a 15-year-old schoolboy with murder on his mind. I came to kill the Jews, he says. On Sunday, Israeli soldiers thought he looked suspicious at this West Bank roadblock. They found a bomb strapped to his chest, but detonated it safely. Already this year, 50 Palestinian boys under the age of 18, 5 under 16, have been found trying to carry bombs into Israel. At Mohammed's home in the Nablus refugee camp, his parents were devastated and furious. Surprisingly, not with Israel, but with the Palestinian militants, who they say brainwashed their son. Dalal, Mohammed's mother.
They are criminals, these people who send children. God will punish them.
So who are they? She had no doubt. The Al-Aqsa Brigade, the militia that carried out dozens of suicide attacks against Israel and are financed by the Palestinian government. So now we're walking through the Nablus refugee camp looking for Al-Aqsa leaders. They'll deny it, they usually do. Yesterday we found the Al-Aqsa leader. Since the truce with Israel, Nasser Abu Aziz can walk more freely. He himself was jailed at the age of 13 for attacking Israeli soldiers. But he swore he would never send a child to his death. Never. You're the head of Al-Aqsa in Nablus. How is it possible that you don't know who did it?
Maybe it was the Israelis. We told Abu Mazen, the Palestinian president, we will investigate. But Al-Aqsa would not do this.
And today we found Mohammed. He's being interrogated by the Israeli secret services. This is a message to you from your mother. She asked me to tell you this, that you should depend on God and confess. Boy, please tell the Israelis everything. Tell them who sent you. And we asked him, who gave you the bombs? At first he wouldn't say. Then
Al-Aqsa. They came to get me 5 times. In the beginning I refused. Then they kept talking and talking to me, and in the end I agreed.
Dalal took us to his son's school and found his classmates. They too were angry at Al-Aqsa. It's quiet now, Mustafa says. It's safe. Why send Mohammed with a bomb to destroy everything? And Dalal cried to the children, don't let anyone brainwash you. Your mothers need you, like I need my son. Mohammed says Al-Aqsa promised him he would be a martyr and God would forgive him. Instead, tonight, he is lost and alone. Martin Fletcher, NBC News, Nablus on the West Bank.
So after the interview with him ended, I told him he was, you know, he couldn't smoke on camera, but he was smoking a cigarette, and whenever he finished a cigarette, he'd light another one right from the butt, you know, chain smoking. And when we finished the interview, I said to him, you know, do you have a message for your mother? And he said, what, you're going to see my mother? I said, yeah, I promised I would. I promised I'd go back to her and tell her how you are. What should I tell her? He said, oh my God. And now he was terrified. Now he had real fear on his face. He says, you're going to see my mother? He said, oh my God. He said, please please don't tell my mother I smoke. Really? No. So, you know, you can't make it up, and you can't condemn, really. I mean, how can you condemn, this is a suicide bomber, but how can you condemn a 15-year-old boy who doesn't want his mother to know he smokes? And you can see he was being brainwashed by these people. And yet, really, a suicide bomber, you think, really kind of the lowest of the low. But what I learned from him and from Wafa and from others that I met was that don't rush to judgment. You know, find out their story, tell their story fairly and accurately. You don't have to condone what they do, by no means, but understand where they come from, and how do you bridge those differences that force people into those situations. So that's what I did. That's what I was trying to do in my work. You know, don't rush to judgment. Find out ways to continue the next day. Meet people, and I'm not going to belabor the point, but like Seeds of Peace are an organization, and there are many organizations, by the way, in Israel. There's probably hundreds of organizations that are trying to mend fences between Jews and Arabs. As we know, not with terrific success, but there's good people who try and should be supported. Can you show the still of Evelyn, please, now, Sean? Evelyn is the girl that I met in Uganda, in Kampala. And this is another one of those images, which I think you have to look at to understand why it's special. Because, where is this thing? She's 8 years old, Evelyn. She's 8 years old. Both of her parents died of AIDS. She's HIV positive. They begin and end their day with drugs. This is an American aid, burlap sack of aid that they emptied and ate. And this is the remarkable thing, you know, the joy of success, a message for all young children in East Africa. And if you can, Sean, if you can show the story, please.
We met Evelyn Katabizi in a foster home in Kampala, Uganda. A little girl with big problems and great hopes. Before bed, I asked her what she dreams of.
When I'm with my mother.
You dream of your mother?
Yes.
Where is your mother?
She died.
Her mother died of AIDS. Her father too, and Evelyn is HIV positive. Her days begin and end with drugs. She came here aged 2, close to death. Today, aged 8, she's thriving. She has friends and is accepted by everybody. At school, her favorite subjects are maths and English. But life is a struggle for this little girl who is wise beyond her years. This is her school book.
So Evelyn here, under the name of the school, says School of Struggle, and the class, instead of science or mathematics or something, she has written Class of Hope. School of Struggle, Class of Hope.
And what does she hope for? When she grows up, Evelyn wants to be a pilot. Back at the home, the children eat together. Rice, beans, fried onions. Some children with HIV, some without. And pray together.
Who is your best friend? All of them. I'm sure they love you very much.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just one little girl among many thousands here fighting AIDS and hoping for a better life. Martin Fletcher, NBC News, Kampala, Uganda. So she's really one of my main teachers, and this is a kid I just can't forget. But her whole story and the place that where we found her, she was it wasn't an orphanage, it was a foster home. They didn't like to call it orphanage because they said an orphanage suggests a grim past, whereas a foster home suggests a potential future. So that was the language was very important to them. The woman who looked after her, she had about 35 kids. The way she started the school was about 12 years earlier. A woman came to her and said, please help me get some poison. I want to kill my 2 daughters and myself. I don't want my daughters to grow up the way I did in prostitution and violence and drugs. And the woman
no, Lena, her name was, said, I've got a better idea, give me your 2 daughters. Excuse me. And she did, and that was they were the first 2 children in the foster home. And I said to her, what happened to those kids? And she said, well, you know what, come with me. Excuse me. Anyway, so the bottom line, we got in a car, we drove half an hour to the other side of town, and the 2 girls were just graduating. The 2 girls were just graduating from high school. It's pretty amazing. So that's, it's an example of don't give up, There's a life out there, don't give up. Moving right along, in terms of not giving up, some things are almost impossible. How do you carry on? How is that possible? But that sort of plays into people always asking me, how do you keep going to all these crazy, dangerous places and doing this? And it's partly, I think, my own family story. What I understood, only within the last few years really, was that my goal had always been to basically tell other people's stories in moments of transition. When something terrible happens, how do you get on with the rest of your life? And so that was the story that I was telling repeatedly around the world for decades, really. That was the motivating story, was all these terrible things happen, how do you carry on? And then that led into the question of, well, why do you do this? Why do you risk your life in this way? Sometimes, not always, but sometimes it's very dangerous. And so what is the answer to that? So what I understood was that eventually looking for other people's tragic stories of how they carried on with the rest of their lives was actually my own family story. My parents were refugees from the Holocaust, all of the survivors of the Holocaust. Almost all of their family members were killed. All the mothers and fathers, all the grandparents, all the cousins and uncles were killed. Everybody was murdered except for one other sister of my father and one other sister of my mother. And everybody else was murdered. And my parents, grew up in that knowledge that their parents, as we saw in the Auschwitz story, disappeared through smoke through the chimney. That's how they were murdered. Some of them, not only in Auschwitz, in Majdanek, in different places, in Riga. And that was a story that I was seeking all around the world, while actually it was in my own backyard, which I didn't realize that. I mean, I really didn't think about that until a few years ago, when I started writing. Writing, by the way, is a fantastic way of looking into yourself. And so that's what fascinated me, was that my own story, well, actually my parents' story, excuse me, was the story that I was seeking throughout. And I think that probably made me a better reporter and more willing and able and wanting to tell that story, even if I didn't really understand what I was doing when I was doing it. Sean, can you show the next story, next still? So this is Auschwitz. This is a famous photograph of the survivors at the last day, who Primo Levi wrote about, saying they put an amazing metaphor image, saying he saw them putting themselves, white, thin, emaciated, dying bodies putting themselves across the earth, the cold earth, like slugs, like white slugs. So this are the survivors. This is the Auschwitz there, and this is Shlomo Minsk playing a violin, which is that also survived the Holocaust. And there's a whole story about that, which I won't go into because it's in the book, but it's actually a fantastic story of how this violin survived, and the little boy called Motela, who played it, who was killed by the Nazis. Actually, you know what? Sean, can you play the next video? Because actually, I forgot. The video tells the story. And it's an amazing story. What a journey. This is such a great story, I don't want to mess it up. So take your time, find a way to play it properly, yeah? And in the meantime, I'll just talk for a moment. The one story of one little teacher of mine was in Somalia, in Mogadishu. And this is like really, I think, It's the worst thing that I ever did, I feel. What happened was I was in Mogadishu in a feeding station. And this little boy really is my teacher. A feeding station, Mogadishu in Somalia, dozens of people dying a day from starvation or diseases related to starvation. And one little boy kept following me around as I was filming with my team. And he was about 6 years old, I believe, had an extended belly, his hair was falling out in tufts, he was starving and he was sick. And I offered him a sandwich, and he didn't want the sandwich. So after a bit, I offered him my water, and he didn't want the water either. But he kept following me around the camp, and I offered him food and drink, he didn't want it. He kept saying, no, no. And then finally I asked my translator, what does he want? Why is this kid following me? And he said, he wants your pencil. And I said, but I've only got one. You know, and it's like, what a response is that? And so I didn't give him my pencil. And then afterwards I thought, what a schmuck, you know, why didn't you give me your pencil? And then I was looking for him for days. I got a whole load of pencils from the NBC supplies, and I couldn't find this kid. And what I realized was I'd come halfway around the world to report on this on the starvation in the camps, and I couldn't see beyond my notebook. This kid, he didn't. For him, it wasn't about food and drink. It wasn't about surviving physically. It was about surviving mentally. He wanted food for the mind. He wanted a pencil to draw with or to write with. I don't know what for, but that's what he wanted, and I didn't see that. I missed that, and it kills me. And to this day, it gives me shivers that I didn't give a kid a pencil. For God's sake, you know, I didn't understand what this boy needed, and that's why I support this charity called Artolution, because these are young people, young artists who go around the world to refugee camps around the world, bringing paint and brushes and paper, and they do these fantastic murals, getting refugee children to paint, and they teach the refugees to be art teachers when they go away, and then they send them art supplies, and the local refugee artists, new artists, teach the children, and they play and they love it, and it's just a wonderful charity. So that's where all the money from the book's going, and all the money from Hagar's painting goes to support Artolution. It's a wonderful organization. You can check them out, artolution.org. So that boy taught me such an important lesson about pay attention. You know, it's not only about you and your story. It's about these people and their lives. And that was, so, you know, Evelyn, that little boy whose name I never got, Wafa, Yehona, all these stories in the book, they're very important. They're very important people because they're living their lives and they're making the best of it under amazingly difficult circumstances. And the big takeaway for me is always, we should be so happy with what we've got, even if it's a little, because, boy, there's so many people with nothing. Maybe this is going to work now. Can we try this?
What a journey. From the Holocaust to this workshop in Tel Aviv to Auschwitz. This violin is unique, and not because of the music.
That's not important, the violin, the story. That's an unbelievable story.
It's 1944. A 12-year-old boy called Motala, the sole survivor of a Nazi massacre, is hiding in a forest in the Ukraine. When resistance fighters find him, Motala is asleep and hugging this violin, and he wants revenge. When Amnon Weinstein got the violin, it was damaged and unplayable, but he reconstructed it and its story too. He found out that the boy began to play the violin for Nazi officers in their club.
You see here, there is like a fingerprint.
That's the boy's fingerprint?
No, never ever. He was playing for drunk people. And the Germans are drinking schnapps, and this is alcohol. And I do believe that maybe in one evening or something like that, one of the officers who was completely drunk grabbed the violin, give me, I will play also.
Each time he played for them, Motala smuggled explosives into their club. Then one day,
he put the fuse inside, he lighted it out, ran away, and was a big explosion.
200 Germans killed and wounded.
So that's how to say, a revenge with a violin. A nice one.
Later, the Germans killed Mottila, but Amnon has his own kind of revenge. The violin plays on. In Jerusalem, and even in the death camp in Auschwitz. One of the world's great violinists, Shlomo Minsk, plays Mottila's violin. Amnon was there.
Everybody was crying. How was it for you in Auschwitz when he played? Horrible. This was really a moment that I will never forget all my life, and for 2 months I could not sleep after.
Amnon thought of Mottila and of his own family killed in the Holocaust, and he said, "The Nazis are gone, but we're still here." For today, Martin Fletcher, NBC News, Tel Aviv. That's what I got. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I mean, it's hard to follow that anyway, so I'll be happy to answer any questions on any subject from anybody.
I'm sure you get this. First of all, that was fantastic. Martin?
Thank you.
Do you see any solution
They told me to...
for the Israeli-Palestinian situation?
Well, that's an easy one to start, and knock that out of the park, easy. Actually, I do have a solution. Or rather, I think I know when there will be a solution. And that is, and as you could probably imagine, this is a practiced answer, because I've written about it. Look, there will be no answer, there will be no solution until two things happen. The Israelis have to realize that might is not the answer to everything. And the Palestinians have to realize that time is not on their side. When they finally get that into their heads, at that point, maybe there'll be enough willingness to compromise. But that's a long way from happening, a long way from happening. And of course, what we're seeing happening in Israel today, actually, is the Jewish part of Israel tearing itself apart for other reasons. You know, so the Palestinian issue has taken a back seat. But I think those two conditions need to be fulfilled before the issue can be addressed. I mean, President Biden spoke today to the Israeli President Yaakov Herzog, and was talking about we must continue with a two-state solution. And everybody pays lip service to this two-state solution. What two-state solution? It's gone way beyond that. So it's grim future. A friend of mine who was the Director General of Prime Minister Barak's office when he was Prime Minister. He was Director General. So he said to me recently, he said, it's going to, I said, what's going to happen? He said, it's going to get worse, then it's going to get much worse, and then it'll get better. So I'll stick with his optimism, but I've got no idea how.
Can I go? First of all, that was incredibly poignant and moving story, and
thank you.
Sad, but also some optimism there. I'm going to ask another one of these big existential type questions, so do your best to be brief. But anyway, what is your view, having covered so much tragedy and dictatorship and authoritarianism around the world, about what is happening today with the rise of dictatorship, authoritarianism, nationalism, on and on? What is the reason you think there's so much of that, in your opinion? Thank you.
I think this is like baseball, and not this one out of the park too. No. Well, I think that this is, we have seen the best of democracy. I think after the Second World War, I believe we are in a post-democratic phase, which is redefining what democracy is. And we were very lucky. I mean, certainly my generation in Europe, probably the luckiest generation ever. You've had Vietnam, or Korea, Vietnam, Iraq. We haven't had anything. The Falklands, But for mostly in Europe, we had the best generation ever. We had 70 years of developing democracies. And yet what's happening? Poland, Hungary, Austria to an extent, Sweden to an extent. Germany has a rebirth of the right in Germany. So there's a move away from the liberal democracy that many of us embrace. And that's what's happening. There's a move away from that. It's a post-democratic phase that we're redefining what democracy is, and authoritarianism is the replacement. And what has caused authoritarianism through history has always been the same thing, which is discontent among the masses, led by cynical leaders. It's a combination of cynical leaders and discontent for whatever those reasons of discontent are, and there are many. I think that's what's happening, and I think that it's getting worse. Israel is going that way quickly. If President Trump is re-elected, this is a serious move away from our happy liberal democracy. We're creating something new. That kind of partly answers them. Please.
Do you have hope? And if you do have hope, what gives you hope? Small question.
Yeah, right. What gives me hope? First of all, I'm an optimist, and I do have hope, and I know that things will get better, and that's the lesson I've learned. If we pay attention to each other, things get better. If we help other people, things get better. That's what we can do. So, look at all you guys. You spent money on a book, and all that book's going to a charity. Tom and Rita Saliba spend a lot of time helping all kinds of charities. I'm sure many people here do. That's where hope comes from. Hope comes from good people. And there are plenty of good people. As I said in the very beginning, one thing I've understood only very recently is that the leaders want power and money, people want peace and quiet. That's where my hope lies, peace and quiet.
Perhaps this is me thinking as a mother. I can't get away from the image of a 15-year-old boy who was prepared to blow himself up. Aren't there 22, not that it's any better, but aren't there any 22-year-olds that would do it? As opposed to a child?
Well, that's a fantastic question. When the suicide bombing campaign began in Israel, around about the Palestinian campaign against Israelis, around about 94, 95, Israeli intelligence agencies predicted there's only about 10 people who fit the profile of a potential suicide bomber. That was in about 94. After about 5 years, the terrorist organizations, and I call them terrorists because anybody who sends a suicide bomber to me is a terrorist, were turning them away. They had so many volunteers, they were turning people away. It was hard to get qualified as a suicide bomber. They had plenty of 22-year-olds, they had plenty of all kinds of people, but the minds that they could manipulate most easily are the children. And well, it's just extraordinary. I met, if you remember that story where I went to find out of Muhammad, if you think about the elements in that story, I can't remember them all off my heart, but the things I did to get that story. I found the kid in jail, we went to see his mother, and we went into the camp and found Al-Aqsa, and we did all these different things that took time. The reason we were able to do that, and the reason people helped us, was because the kid was only 15. The mother went to the school and said to the school children, "Don't let them brainwash you. Your mother needs you as I need my son." I think that was what she said. There are plenty of volunteers of all ages, but it's the children who one remembers most. And you just realize these kids are abused. And that's why I say you can't rush to judgment. Suicide bomber did this or did that. Why did he do that? Find out. Don't judge, don't dismiss. And by understanding, hopefully one can do some good. And that's where I come from as a journalist. So.
About money and power and peace and quiet. And I think you've hit it on the nose, and you talked about cynical leaders. We've always had cynical leaders. So I'd be interested in your comment on this. I know a guy who spent a lot of time in the Middle East, talking to people on both sides, leaders, some of whom are leaders today that he spoke to. And I said to him at one point, doesn't Netanyahu understand that power changes, the nature of warfare changes, the leverage, the military leverage you have changes, it evolves over years. And so the current process of kind of keeping things under control in the West Bank will someday not be adequate. And so it's going to end. What does Netanyahu think about that? And you know what he said? He said, Netanyahu is a politician who's interested in power, and he knows he'll be dead when that time comes. It's not his problem. Now, do you think that, I'll ask, Netanyahu thinks that?
Do I think he thinks that?
Yeah.
Look, I've got no idea what he thinks. I really don't, because he's changed so much. And I think I did understand. I've known Netanyahu, I met Netanyahu for decades. When he first came to the United States as ambassador to the United Nations, one of the things he did was come to my office in Herzliya near Tel Aviv and ask me about America. And he came a number of times. And by the way, he came to see me probably half a dozen times during that period when he was preparing to take up that job. And he'd always sit opposite me, and he'd leaf through Time and Newsweek while we were chatting. And every time when he left, he took my Time and Newsweek. And I thought that was so revealing of the character of the man. And it was also revealing of me that I never dared shout, hey, that's my Time in Newsweek, give it back. I wish I had. But he was a very sincere man who was trying hard to understand, and he did a terrific job, and he's done very well in different capacities. But time's gone by. He's been there too long. This guy's been hanging around for 20 years. And you can't get rid of him. He's a brilliant politician. He's a brilliant strategic thinker in terms of moving the pieces around the board. Is that good for Israel? I don't think so. Hundreds of thousands demonstrating every day in the streets don't think so. Après moi le déluge. That's Netanyahu. That's basically what you're saying. And I don't know if that's true. I have no idea. I mean, he's manipulating everybody so much and has done so successfully for so long that there is an argument for saying that all these outrageous things he's trying to do now, in terms of changing the legal oversight of the government, being pushed by the right wing, the more extreme his proposals, the more the opposition will protest against it and give him a way to climb down, and he'll be able to delay things. Because all he wants is to stay in power. And he's being driven to the right by these crazy guys, Ben Gvir and what's his name, Smotrich, the finance minister. He's between a rock and a hard place. Now, is he leading them, or are they leading him? It's too early to say. We don't know. We'll have to see what actually happens. But I put my faith. I don't know enough now because I haven't been reporting there, for a number of years. But I put my faith in the leaders of the security agencies, Shin Bet, Mossad, the army, the former leaders of those organizations and other various secret organizations, who are unanimous in saying that what Netanyahu is trying to do is terrible for Israel, is reducing the security of Israel, endangering the security of Israel. And Netanyahu must know that. He's not stupid, not by a long way. He must know that. What he's really up to, I think it's too early to say. I don't know. No one knows. I'm sorry, please.
So how do you see the war in Ukraine being resolved, if at all, and when? And do you see similarities between Putin and Netanyahu, both of them being, like Putin seeming to be desperate, right, between a rock and a hard place? And then just generally, how do you reconcile all the horror in the world, the evil that we've witnessed from, the Holocaust to the Civil War, et cetera, with like the psychology of man? I mean, are there just some men who are inherently evil?
Wow. We need to meet after to talk about this. I'm going to just focus on one little part of what you said. Putin and Netanyahu are similar. Not at all. Absolutely not at all. I mean, Putin is a dangerous fanatic who goes to war at the drop of a hat to achieve his goals. In Crimea, in Donbass, now in Ukraine. Netanyahu is the opposite. He does not want to go to war. Netanyahu is unbelievably careful. He talks a lot, but he's been a very, very non-military leader. He hasn't taken Israel to a war. He's avoided major conflicts, apart from these small 3-4 days things in Gaza, which have often been thrust upon him more than him seeking them out. You know, he supports the settlers, he does all kinds of things you can object to, but he does not take Israel to war. He hasn't done that, and he's been very careful to avoid it. And all that talk about Netanyahu and Barak, when Barak was defense minister, getting ready to attack Iran, for instance. That was a big deal, but that was a big bluff too. It never happened. There's no way they can do that. Iran's 1,000 miles, there's all kinds of reasons. So no, I would Putin and Netanyahu are very, very different animals. In terms of the spirit of man, I'm going to have to give that one a miss.
This is a question, I guess, about journalistic ethics. Maybe a little smaller topic. I thought of it when you were speaking of the warlord in Mogadishu, whose home you stayed in, and then the 15-year-old boy. It seems to me that the people who are out in it just for the power, as you've been talking about, one of the ways they get that power is by having the journalistic camera lens pointed at them and their story getting told. Have you ever faced a situation where you wondered whether you were doing the right thing by covering a story and telling it to the rest of us?
Well, that's a really important question. And in my case, I got to honestly say the answer probably is no. I probably never tortured myself over whether I should be reporting this or not. But there is a great debate to be had about it. My response, my feeling has been, I just traveled halfway around the world, I'm going to do this goddamn story, just rather selfishly. But there are, yeah, I mean, as I said, there's no rule book for what I do. And you find yourself in all these horrific situations, and you've got to try and do the right thing. What is the right thing? To me, the right thing is unflinchingly challenge these people when necessary, even while accepting their hospitality, and I have done, I can give you a few examples if you like, in order to understand who they are and what they want, and tell their story fairly and accurately. That's what I do. If I can't do that, there have been occasions when I've said to embassy, I don't have the information, I can't do this story. But are we giving them oxygen by telling their story? Many times, yes. I think that's more of a domestic thing about the kind of people you deal with here, with gun control and terrorism, hostage situations. Should you ignore them? I don't think so. I'm all for. I believe that you have to open up the world to everything that's happening to it, and then make the correct decisions. And I'll give you one example. In 9/11, when all those people were jumping out of the buildings, and the networks showed one or two, and then they all stopped showing it because it was like not nice. I think they should have showed it, but that's me, because it was happening, it was real. And another example: once I went to Rwanda. Remember the genocide in Rwanda? The Hutus killed 800,000 Tutsis in 100 days, and threw many of their bodies in the river, the Kagera River, and the river, Kagera River. So I was actually in South Africa for Mandela at the time. So we chartered up and we flew into Tanzania, went to the border, and there were a few other journalists already there. There was a field, must have been 80,000 people in this one field, Tutsi refugees who'd run away. And all the press stayed there. But I had read that the Hutus were throwing the bodies in a river. So I said, let's keep going, we'll go find this river. So we're the only people who did this. We're the only people. It was a dicey situation because no one knew actually who was around. And there was a lot of killing going on. Anyway, we made our way to the waterfalls, the Kagera waterfalls. And there they were, the bodies were coming over like every 30 seconds. There was a Tutsi body floating down the river, falling over the waterfalls. And there was an eddy at the bottom of the waterfalls where there was about 15 or 20 bodies all floating. It was an eddy, so they were all on top of each other. And the water went this way, but they were stuck there until the water took them away. And it was a horrific sight. It was really awful. And so you had these bodies there, the bodies falling, going by on the river. And we filmed that. And so then the question was, well, should we, can we use this? And I said, well, if this was Americans, there's no way NBC would show these pictures. So we just showed 3 of them. We showed 3 shots of the bodies. And it was for a magazine program, a Dateline for NBC News. And so we're doing this magazine piece. And, no, sorry, a different show now. It's no longer there. And we showed the 3 pictures, and the executive producer of the show said, have you got any more pictures? We said, yeah, we got loads. So he said, well, give me more. So we gave him more bodies, and then more bodies. In the end, we used every body we had. Sounds horrific, and it is horrific. And the executive producer was Jeff Zucker. Remember Jeff Zucker, famous CNN, etc., big deal. But he was the EP of that show, and he wanted everybody. Why? Because let's not beat around the bush. They were black guys from Africa. It didn't matter. If they were Americans, we wouldn't have shown one of them. So, and I had a discussion with him about that. So I think that would be an example of the ethics of what do you choose to show. Who do you give oxygen to? It's a different question, but I mean it's part of that same issue. And I think it's wrong. I don't think you shouldn't show the bodies. I think you should show them if they're American. But the question of giving oxygen to bad people is a balance between giving them oxygen and, on the other hand, they're doing what they're doing. I think the world should know about it. That's my view.
Martin, we have time for just one more.
One more.
So thank you for sharing these stories. Like for me, it's not only learning from you, is that you shed lights on a lot of scenes that I lived myself. So for me, I survived the war in Lebanon, and these stories are very similar. But for me now, how can we learn from these stories? When you mentioned you were saying goodbyes to your kids when they leave to go to school, I said goodbye every day to my parents because I never knew if my neighbor might be a suicide bomber. Again, these stories. And for me, what it kept me going is that the hope that tomorrow is going to be a better day. The hope that I found my pencil and I continued to be able to leave my country and find a place here. So it gave me the voice to be here and to do a difference. So for me here, with all of these stories and all of these lessons, how can we prevent these corruptions by politicians to use our children, to take away the hopes of families, to take away their kids? And how can we make a difference from here, from this place, from United States, to make a difference for different countries that are surviving war? That's my question.
Well, America can do a lot. I mean, if America can't help, nobody can help. And that's part of what journalists, I think, what I feel my journalism has been about, is informing Americans about what's happening around the world. And I was in Beirut in 76 and 77. And if you look at the situation of Beirut, Lebanon today, it's still pretty horrific in many ways. So not much has happened in the last 50 years. And that's what I fear about Israel in 20 years. It's going to look very different. America has to use its muscle as the world's policeman. Not everybody in America wants to do that. And why should they? I mean, it's not America's problem, or is it? So that's a whole different issue. I believe it is America's problem, because America is the most powerful country in the world and needs to use that power and strength for good. Why not? when America saved Europe after World War II with the Marshall Plan by pumping money into Europe to rebuild the economies, it wasn't only to make Europe a better place, it was to build a market for America to sell its goods. So there's, one hand washes the other. You get a benefit from helping. And so I suppose the answer probably is find the place where America can help and benefit at the same time. And that's your sweet spot. Thank you. Thank you.